Join us in the fight to restore liberty and American exceptionalism. Together, let's make the case that our charters of freedom are worth defending and honoring. Right here is where the great American experiment comes alive. Let's get to work.
It's time now to learn about the proper role of the U.S. legislature under the Constitution, and I can't think of anybody better, my dear friend from Phoenix, Arizona, Mr. Shane Krauser.
Thank you. Thank you. Appreciate it. I want to try and talk with you here as opposed to there. Any problems? We good? Well, I have to say, I only wish that my wife believed half of the stuff that you just heard, because that was pretty good introduction there, Brad. Thank you so much. We're going to be talking about Congress tonight, but I want to talk about the president for just a moment. You know, I've been teaching out at the college for about 10 years now. Constitutional law, criminal justice, and of course, constitutional law is my favorite class, because I get 30 to 40 students to come into my classroom, spend 16 weeks with me, and they've got some pretty warped ideas about the way the world operates. As you can imagine, when I asked them on my first day of class, where do our liberties come from? What do you think well over 80% of my students say? Government. That is the absolute truth. We're going to talk about Congress. But I have some Indians that came through my students just recently, and they told me that they had changed the name of Barack Obama. Did you all hear this? They've changed the name of Barack Obama to Walking Bird. Yes. They said, I said, why did you all change his name? They said, he's so full of crap he can no longer fly. There you have it. So anyways. Can I take up, I can maybe take up a little bit of comedy talking with Brad Zinn there. Let me ask you, what are your greatest concerns when you look at that body of Congress out in Washington, D.C.? What are your greatest concerns about what they're doing, what it is they understand, and what it is they're trying to facilitate?
Greatest concern is how to get rid of them.
Greatest concern is how to get rid of them. Yeah, it reminds me of Thomas Sowell, who said, individuals who run for office and ultimately are in office have two primary concerns: elections and re-elections. And he said the third one is way down the road. What is that? Who knows? But you're right. We've got to understand how to get rid of those individuals who don't understand the oath that they've taken. They've taken an oath. They've made a promise. We send people to jail for not keeping their promises. Consider this. Any lawyers in the house tonight? There you go. What kind of law do you practice?
I'm retired.
There you go. I knew you wouldn't admit you were a practicing lawyer. I mean, see, I left the practice of law a year ago, and I tell you, it is awesome. I love it. I feel liberated, free. I went through law school and was never taught what the Constitution means. Do you know in law school we're not even required to read the Constitution? Well over 99% of all law schools do not require their students to read the Constitution. So I spent all of this time taking courses called constitutional law. And what did we do in those courses? We learned about what the Supreme Court had to say about the Constitution. We never talked about Congress and their oath and the promise that they've made. We never talked about the executive branch and the powers that have been delegated to him. We never had those conversations. It was, this is what the Supreme Court said, and that's the end-all be-all. And this is a vicious cycle that's taking place in our culture, because when I have my students come in and we start debating what it is the Supreme Court has done, we don't even get very far, because I'll ask them about a particular issue. First Amendment and flag burning. First Amendment at Westboro Baptist Church. Second Amendment and the right to bear arms. The Fourth Amendment and the right to be left alone. Fifth and Sixth Amendment and due process and the right to a trial when the government decides they want to mount their resources against the individual. And I'll ask them a question about these things, and their answer is almost always the same when I question them about their position. Well, the Supreme Court said that's the way it is. See, we have a culture that doesn't know how to think independently about these issues. And so when you have an individual who takes an oath, it means really nothing to our culture, and it means nothing to them. I mean, as an individual who practiced law, let's just assume, for the sake of argument, I want to put together a trust. And I've got $500,000 that I want to put in this trust. I am the trustor. You are the trustee. And we're going to put together a trust that's going to outline for her exactly what she must do. She's got to follow the instructions. And so I sign on the dotted line, she signs on the dotted line, and what do you do with that $500,000? You're in charge of it. Well, what will you do specifically, given that there's a trust?
The trust agreement.
Right.
Tells me I can do it. It's contractual.
Well, I like how you're talking, right? You're going to, you say you're going to follow the rules, but in fact, that's not what you did with my trust. I saw the car that you rolled up in. You see that? Yes. I saw the car. Well, let's take a second here. I saw that car. You know, that nice Mercedes, or was that a Lexus? Not sure. You went out and bought, you paid $75,000 for this car. If this were a trust that we had entered into, what would I do? Well, there would be a criminal investigation that would be taking place. And we hoped she would be charged with fraud. And in our culture, to steal that kind of money from an individual, she would likely go to jail. Think about that for a moment. It's a trust. But what is it that Congress does? There's a trust there as well, isn't there? We are the trustors. They are the trustees. The people that took the oath are the trustees. But what happens when they don't follow the rules?
They excuse themselves.
They excuse themselves. They get to keep their job, and they got a great paycheck and a pension on the horizon. There's something terribly, terribly, terribly wrong with a culture that says, you know what, if you break a trust for $75,000, you go to jail. But if you break the ultimate trust, that of the Constitution, the rule of law, you get to keep your job, make more money, and you'll have a pension waiting for you for the rest of your life. There's something terribly wrong with that idea.
And the admiration of your compatriots.
What's that?
And the admiration
That's
of
right.
your compatriots.
That's right. You have individuals that stand up and tell people what they want to hear. And when you start giving things to certain people, Thomas Jefferson said, when things start being offered to individuals that are monetary in value, there is the end of our constitutional republic. And we see that precisely going on today, don't we? Absolutely. Government is in the business of giving out gifts. They do it every day. But we have to understand where this philosophy comes from. Now, Trevor's going to talk to you about some things that are going to blow you away. He's going to blow you away when you hear some of these things. I want to talk to you about some of the things that are being said in Congress right now. I've got a few audio clips I want you to hear. I don't want you to just take my word for it. I want to show you this progressive, liberal ideology that permeates its way throughout Congress. Now, I know when we say the word progressive or liberal, sometimes we use it as a punchline. We use it as a cute soundbite. But what does it mean when we say that somebody is liberal or progressive? When we talk about a communist, let's just put it in very simple terms. There are individuals that think that they can live your life better than you can live it. And they will take your resources and your rights in order to do that. Because, in fact, they believe that they can live your life better than you can. They get to make the decisions for you. It's like Plato's Republic, Thomas Hobbes' Leviathan. These are ideas that are really the outdated ideas. As a group, what do we continue to be told the same thing over and over and over again. You guys believe in outdated ideas. But the real outdated ideas are the socialist ideas that are being crammed down our throats right now from Washington, D.C. Those are the real outdated ideas. The redistribution of wealth is an outdated idea. Taking away the guns of the people and putting it in the hands of the government is an outdated idea. See, these ideas found in the Constitution are rather new ideas. They're ideas that are inherent in all of us, but we've experienced something in America over the last 225 years that no other country has ever experienced. We have experienced on this land more prosperity, opportunity, and equality than any other land ever in the history of this world. And we should be unashamed to stand and defend these ideas. You know, I was on a radio program not too long ago. This was about a year and a half ago. And somebody called in and said, you know, we're talking about this Constitution, and you know, Mr. Krauser, I've never met you before, I've never seen you before, but the way you talk about this document is nauseating. It's time to move on, Krauser, it's time to move on. Get with the program. You're talking about a document that was written 230 years ago by a bunch of old, dead, white men who cared about nothing other than their own property and their own slaves. Okay? So I listen to this nonsense. And my response is very simple. After he gets through with his ridiculous rant, I simply say, tell me where in the text of that Constitution it's outdated. Tell me where. I'm wondering if it's in the 13th Amendment that abolishes slavery. Is that the outdated idea? Or maybe it's in the 15th Amendment that permits everyone to vote, regardless of race. Or maybe it's the 19th Amendment that allows every individual to vote regardless of gender. Are those the outdated ideas you might be speaking of? Or maybe it's the 14th Amendment. You know that 14th Amendment that talks about equal protection under the law? That says the government doesn't get to choose who it will protect and who it will harass? They don't get that discretion. They protect everyone across the board. Is that what you're referring to as being outdated? Or maybe it's this 8th Amendment, you know, cruel and unusual punishment. When government decides that it's going to punish an individual after they convicted them, you cannot impose a punishment that is deemed cruel and unusual. Is that what you're saying is outdated? Or maybe it's this idea of the 6th Amendment. You know, when government mounts their resources against that individual and they have a right to a fair trial, a public trial, a speedy trial, a right to confront their witnesses, a right to compel their own witnesses to come in and testify on their behalf, a right to have counsel assist them through the process as the government does just that, mounts incredible resources on that individual. Is that outdated? Or the idea that an individual can remain silent and not have his silence be used against him? Is that what you're talking about? Or maybe it's that silly 4th Amendment that says you have the right to be left alone. Yeah, my favorite. Or the 2nd Amendment, you know, the right to defend yourself. It sounds like a pretty outdated idea to me. Maybe that's what you're referring to. Or maybe that 1st Amendment. You know, that crazy 1st Amendment says you have a right to speak, a right to assemble, the free exercise of religion. Is it that? Or maybe it's those 7 articles that say 2 things essentially. Men and women are born free, and men and women cannot be trusted with power. And because they can't be trusted with power, we must put limitations on them. Tell me what's outdated. What was the response, do you think? It was a dial tone. It was a dial tone. We got to have this discussion. We've got to have this debate because what they're doing on the other side, individuals that embrace these communistic ideals and policies come up with these sound bites that they never thought them through. And so for them, it's easy to go after the Constitution because they've never read the document for the most part. It's easy for them to target the document because they don't even understand that the very freedoms that are listed therein allow them to advocate ideas that are in opposition to it. And yet they haven't even read the document. But they would rather undermine it because it's an issue of power. It's an issue of control. See, when we go back to Plato's Republic, what was the underlying idea? It was simply this. Men and women are inclined towards greed, power. And as they're inclined towards greed and power, there's an inclination to hurt other individuals. So we, the philosopher kings, will rise up. And of course, we're not inclined towards power and greed and hurting other individuals, but we will rise up and tell all of you peasants what to do. See, this is what's being played out today. That's what we're talking about when we start talking about communism. Individuals standing up and say, I can live your life better than you. You didn't really build that. We gave you the liberty and the resources to build that. It was government that provided that way for you.